is the real America? That is the question we brought to Washington Square Park, New York City's like chaos zone the other day. We wanted to know people's hottest political takes. Let me tell you, the answers were interesting. So we're going to run through those on this episode of What the Fuck America. I'm Grace Weinstein, and we are joined by the Recount senior political producer. Let's talk about these 4 categories that I pulled out from a wealth of diverse, engaging, and bizarre answers in the park.
I'm excited to see what's actually in this beyond the euphemisms you're using right now.
I think it's going to blow your mind, and you're simply not ready, because I do just want to sit here and say, I was really not ready. There was nothing that I was expecting, but whatever I was subconsciously expecting was not what I was given. So.
Going to Washington Square Park on a Monday is already an act of bravery, so I'm excited to see what we're looking at.
Thank you so much. I really felt that way too. God forbid I be lumped in with the TikTok crowd. So let's jump in right here.
Hey, that's not crazy. He really escaped from the Illuminati type shit. You see everybody they got Gucci, they clone Gucci. They clone everybody. I'm telling you.
They clone Gucci Man?
Yeah. It was the one failed experiment.
Oh. Would you support him if he ran for president?
Hell no. Hell no. He crazy then.
Okay.
This is a great example of the many conspiratorial types of clips that we got from people. This was like my favorite one, obviously. Gucci Mane was cloned, and I in the back go, oh,
yeah, I can hear you really trying to draw that out of him.
Right, but then there were a couple of other like head nods, wink winks and stuff to other conspiracy theories. One of them was when civil unrest comes to America, the government will no longer be able to conceal everything that's kept and stored in Area 51.
Oh, yeah.
And we will find out about all their secrets, which, of course, a white guy with dreads told me that, which I was like, of course you think that. Another woman was like, you know, anybody who's into politics is brainwashed. Like, it's all brainwashing, which, you know, there's some validity there. I understand what she's saying. And she went on to explain her point of view. But what do you think, like, this rise in conspiracy culture is due to?
I mean, I think I love conspiracy theories.
Do you?
Personally. Have we not talked about this? I think that it is a fascinating topic. I am a believer in some, but even the ones that I don't believe in, I think we there are things that we can laugh at. And then I think there are things that we can laugh at, but also take a lesson from. Like if somebody's telling me that fluoride in the water is turning frogs gay or whatever, I'm going to be like, okay, whatever. If somebody is telling me the CIA killed JFK or whatever, I am interested in the actual reasons behind what has brought them to that conclusion.
Totally.
One example being like there is a lot of evidence that the CIA and FBI did a lot of corrupt things and participated in coups and spied on Martin Luther King and all these things, you know? So like I think to some degree it's that we've seen evidence that some things that were conspiracies once upon a time turned out to be true.
But I also think about like conspiracy theories and why they would be, you know, so suited for growth in our current environment. And it's like, I do think people really have a crisis of faith.
Yeah, totally.
And we're not the most religious demographic, the most religious generation. Gen Z is like less religious than I think
Anyone
right.
in human history, maybe. Yeah.
So, but there are these crises of faith. Okay, we can't believe in the government. We can't believe in our leaders. We don't know where to turn. So it's like humans are wired to want to ask why things happen and attach themselves to whatever the emotionally available answer might be that they find online.
And I think the religion point is a great point because religion is also like, it's kind of fun, right? It's fun and
something bigger than myself.
Yes, there's something else going on than just what I'm experiencing. And that's what a conspiracy theory is at the end of the day. There is something deeper, something secret, something bigger going on than just what I see. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to believe that this is all there is.
Right.
That's a little bit depressing.
And to feel like you're in on the secret is like a very exciting thing.
Yeah. And of course, the internet makes all this worse.
Right.
You know?
It also feeds into like the very worst of our desires for confirmation bias. It's like if you believe the conspiracy and then one little adjacent line turns out to be true, your confirmation bias is going to go way through the roof, which like that's how life works.
Yeah.
But if we're looking for meaning and looking for something to attach ourselves to, like it does make sense why this would happen.
Yeah. And people don't admit they're wrong. And that includes authority figures. Like there are still authority figures who are who don't want to admit that it was wrong to tell people that masks didn't work, in March 2020, even though we knew that they did. And what they were really saying was don't go out and take all the masks because we need healthcare providers to have them, whatever, and people don't want to admit they're wrong. And I think it would do all of us a little bit more to admit we're wrong.
Right.
More.
Oh,
sometimes.
Well, that's
not me, but
no, that is me. And that's the difference between you and me. But what is one conspiracy theory that you're into? I mean, I'm all in on Kate Middleton right now. I think people are going too far, but I'm like, that's not her.
What's your theory?
That they're
they
using
body
all these
doubled
body
her?
double.
Girl, come on.
Absolutely. They're fumbling it so bad. It's not even like close.
Okay. I would love for that to be true. I think that the CIA definitely had a role or I think the U.S. government had a role in John F. Kennedy dying.
Okay.
Personally.
I mean, that's not an uncommon one. That might be like the most.
I mean, polls show actually
with.
Majorities have believed that for like decades.
I'm not surprised.
And of course, QAnon.
Well, of course, QAnon. That's
right. That's how we met.
Through the QAnon Facebook group. That's where you, me, and the QAnon shaman were. So kind of understanding how comfortable people are getting with conspiracy thinking and conspiracy theories has led to this second bucket for me that I was surprised I was able to identify so clearly. I really didn't expect more than one person to bring up something like this, but yet they did. So here we go.
I am Iranian, all right? There was a revolution in 1979 where Iran went from a dictatorship to a theocracy. I think that it would be better if that dictator stayed. A dictator can get things done, as dangerous as it can be to not have political, like a Congress or something like that. They get things done. And when you have a good leader in charge, that's sometimes what is needed in a certain country.
That is a hot take. That is a hot take was my response. I wasn't ready to hear that necessarily. I think I was not really ready to hear that. A dictator is good because at the end of the day, they can get things done. That's what I really want to work with here. I think there was really interesting historical context.
Yeah, for sure.
I absolutely looked back on that and was like, this is something that many, many Iranians who fled the country after this happened believe that things would have been better with a dictator in charge. I think the concern that comes is trying to potentially replicate that thinking, apply it to America, which is a very different situation that we've got going on, to try to pre-cope, or as Roman Roy says, pre-grieve a potential second Trump term, which would look a lot more like an authoritarian rule if he comes through on all of the comments that he's been making.
And this was he the only one making these comments?
No. So there were a couple of other people that hinted at needing a strong man, this idea that other countries respected us when we had somebody who was so powerful and severe in charge, which I don't think is a unique opinion either. I think people think that whether or not that's true because, the rest of the world really didn't respect Trump on a world stage.
Yeah.
So it's whether it's revisionist history or trying to edit or preempt destruction in the future related to a budding authoritarian regime in the United States, in Europe, elsewhere around the world. It really felt like people were trying to find ways to cope with the reality that might happen to us.
Interesting. So I would say two things in defense of this particular guy. Number one would be like comparing Iran pre-revolution and post-revolution. You have two different dictatorships. Right. One is just more theocratic. Like Iran is not freer now than it was before. So I do think it's an imperfect comparison in that way. Like you're not comparing democracy and dictatorships. You're just comparing different flavors of dictatorship. And also the U.S. did assist in the decline of Iranian self-government.
As we did everywhere else.
For sure. And that's another, getting back to conspiracies, like if you're saying like there are these shadowy forces behind the scenes, like that's a real example of that being true. Number two would be like the Arab Spring. Maybe Gen Z doesn't remember the Arab Spring.
Yeah,
because,
what year would you tell them that started?
That was 2011, right? Yeah. So like I was obviously, in fourth grade. And
really tapped into what's going on in the Arab Spring.
Okay, the worst part part of it actually is that I would go on my lunch break to the library in high school and like read about what was going on in the Arab Spring. I was pro Arab Spring, I have to say.
I love
Sue me.
that.
But-
Maybe your administrators at your school were slightly concerned about you.
I think they had a lot of other valid concerns. The big thing, though, was like the Arab Spring had all this promise of like it's going to bring democracy and whatever, and it overthrew dictators in Egypt. It overthrew dictators in Libya. It tried to overthrow Assad in Syria. And the promise was democratic governance. But what we ended up getting was chaos. And those were more stable countries, more economically productive countries. Now, if you're someone who believes that the cry of the people to have whatever, it should be what, you can have whatever opinion you want, but it is not based in anything to say that sometimes dictatorships or lack of democracy is more stable.
They get things done because there's no opposition to hinder getting anything done. Like, I do think that's absolutely true. What's crazy to me is Trump got in trouble for saying that he wanted to be dictator for a day a while ago. On day one, I would be a dictator and do XYZ things. I thought like this Rolling Stone headline was very funny. It was like 74% of Republicans are authoritarian curious. Like 74% of people that they poll, 74% of Republicans that they polled were like, yeah, let him. We endorse that. That's totally fine with us. And I think the framing of authoritarian curious is funny because they've seen, 3 years of a government that they really, really feel strongly has not done anything for them, and hate, I really think is the right word. So they want to go to the pendulum swing complete opposite. It's what, you see countries do all the time. You see it with the rise of all these far right parties in Europe that are winning more and more parliament seats, and we're seeing that happen in the US as well. And if the base is 74% okay with the president potentially acting in a dictatorly way, it just is so interesting how people are trying to figure out how to cope with that idea.
It does. I mean, we've talked about the Trump dictator for a day thing. I think there was a twinkle in his eye or a, tongue-in-cheekness to that. But like, I think the reason people fixated on it is not because of that particular comment, but because of a million other comments he's made.
Placing it in context is people's
for
big
sure. Kind of
argument,
as an example of a larger thing. I do think the two reasons that I think about this are people are, Biden has said a million times that this election is about whether or not democracy works.
Right.
And I think what a lot of people are signaling is that they don't think democracy works. They look around and they say, my rent is super high. My wages have only just started to rise. This historic inflation didn't impact rich people, but it impacted me a ton.
Right.
The national debt is huge. Like the unemployment rate for people of color is enormous. There's still enormous poverty in Appalachia and Indian country and all these problems. They look around and say, what has democracy done to fix these?
Right.
And I don't think that they're without merit.
No, it's a fair question.
Yeah, there are all these problems, but I don't know. It's at the end of the day, I think part of the task of those who stand up and say we need to preserve democracy is to prove that democracy can solve these problems.
Right. And that requires getting things done in a gridlocked Congress.
And sometimes making incremental
House.
Progress on something and getting people to
Totally.
care about the fact that this problem was reduced 25% when they wanted it reduced 100.
Totally.
There's all these complicated things in there.
Yeah. And what I didn't expect when I was kind of putting this all together was that these categories would kind of flow downstream from each other, but it made really clear that there are through lines through all of these issues and people's hottest political takes that become very, very interconnected in a madam web of sorts. Yeah. And you start to understand why everything comes together. So
totally.
As we go into the third one, this was the one that I initially felt surprised by the most, but then was like really challenging why I was so surprised by that, because I shouldn't be. Okay, so here's number 3.
My hottest political take is I'm just really upset with what's going on with the migrant crisis. And I truly believe that as Americans, we have homeless people here who need to be taken care of. We have people here who have gave a lot as veterans that need to be taken care of. And having illegals come in easily and giving them all these rights is an absolute disgrace and insult to American people like myself who are citizens.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a really kind of intense moment because this was something that I was marveling at sort of through the day, how willing people are to share their personal stories. I think that's like a really it makes connectivity available. It makes building an instant connection with someone available. So I was very grateful for people sharing family histories, things that they've been through that have informed their points of view. That being said, he was definitely not the only one who sat down and said, this crisis with migrants has to stop. We can't take care of people in this country as it is. How are we supposed to deal with this? But I was surprised that even in New York, which we think of as such a progressive, lefty, open-minded young city, that over and over again I was getting people who were basically sitting down and saying, I am anti-immigration at this point.
Or anti, illegal or undocumented, or
Sure.
or the current crisis. Yeah.
In exit polls, so many people in varied states from the Canadian border to the West Coast to the East Coast were listing immigration as one of their top priorities. So I was then challenging myself, like, why am I so surprised by this? Like, what bubble does this put me in that I'm like shocked that somebody would sit down and say this to me? Do you feel like that surprises you in any way?
The thing that I take from it is, I mean, number one, this is real validation in some ways of what a lot of conservatives have been saying for years, which is it's really easy to put a little sign in your yard that says immigrants are welcome here or whatever, when you are not having to live next to the person you're supposedly being welcome to.
Yeah,
and
NIMBYism.
Yeah.
I grew up in LA, and it was one of the forever biggest issues for very otherwise liberal people saying not in my backyard.
Totally.
Especially with dealing with an unhoused population that remains a big question mark of how to solve. I think what's so fascinating to me is hearing the language. I'm not like a language police person typically, but hearing the language that people are comfortable with. He was to
Like
all
what?
the illegals.
Uh-huh.
Joe Biden said illegals at the State of the Union, and people took major issue with that. I think this topic has really bled outside of the Fox News conservative bubbles.
For sure.
And otherwise, pretty liberal people have started adding it to their arsenal of issues with this country, which clearly the system is not working. There are millions and millions of asylum cases that have
Desperate
not been
people.
processed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That have not been processed. But I've just noticed the amped up rhetoric and then connecting it to, people who are digging into conspiracy theories, people who are trying to find a way to convince themselves that authoritarianism might be better. These things all just do really connect. And it's wild to see that play out in New York City.
Yeah. I mean, I think the funny thing, and the last thing I would say about this is, you talk to economists and they say the best thing that could be happening for the United States right now is to bring in more immigrants,
Of course.
to work a lot more jobs. When you think about it, New York feels overcrowded because we don't have enough housing and whatever. But there is a ton of this country that is not populated. There is room for cities to be built in Montana and Nebraska and
Absolutely.
Kentucky and Virginia, all over the place. Even in New York, there's room, there's physical room for everyone.
And
But
economic stimulus on the table, for
100%.
sure.
But I think the reason people feel so strongly is they look at, veterans or poverty in the Mississippi Delta or the homelessness crisis in LA, and they say, why are we not spending money on that? And I don't think it's entirely unreasonable for them to say that. The only thing I would say, though, is there is no political party that is proposing spending more on that stuff, because
Right.
you either have Democrats who are mostly saying spend money on both, or Republicans who, whatever you want to believe, their budgets 95% of the time are to spend less money on the things that you're supposedly wanting to spend more money on.
Right. Taking
So
care of people.
It is a product of our two-party system that there is not an option that is speaking to what a lot of these people seem to want.
So flipping the switch on this a little bit, that is the last thing. I was like, we need to cleanse the vibes after all of these shocking things that people said. So this was a clip that we posted on the Recount socials and everybody loved, and we all need to watch it.
That it's entirely possible to provide food, clothing, shelter, housing, education, and medical care for every human being on the planet without fighting a war or ripping anybody off or handing over control of yourself to someone else.
Period. And it shouldn't be controversial to say that.
But it sure as shit is.
But it sure as shit is. I was like, that is to me, that's a New Yorker, right there. That is as New York as it gets. And he sat down and he thought for a second, what am I going to say? And then just spilled this very idealistic version of what we were taught in elementary school at the younger points in our lives where we are captured by imagination, this idealistic version of what America could be rather than attaching himself to what it potentially is right now. Leaving aside the whether or not that is possible or true or whatever, should we be like mimicking that in more ways, saying, you know, why can't we live up to our imagination of what democracy and care and community and support looks like?
Were other people saying similar things, or was that like a unique position?
Were a couple. One of the other ones was like, we need to have more empathy for one another because we are far more similar than we are alike, which that is something I believe to be true. Having talked to people I completely disagree with because of Snapchat and Discord and whatever, like I really do feel that to my core. And then one other kid was like, and this is my favorite, he was like, things are not that bad. America is the greatest country on earth. Every time you get stressed out, just take a walk outside and look around and things are beautiful. And I'm like, of course there is like inherent privilege in saying that, just knowing what's happening in the world right now. But also like, can we not commit ourselves to believing that we're going to be okay and things can be better?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I think it's funny listening to that because it is very New Yorker for cynicism and optimism to somehow kind of be intertwined and be kind of like impatient and annoyed about something good, not like be very energetically annoyed about wanting to make something better or whatever. But it does strike me that feeling of like we need to be able to take care of each other, whatever, is similar in a way to even the people who are like, you know, we should be taking more care of veterans as opposed to letting more people in, whatever. Like, it's a different way of getting to the same goal in a way. And like, there are real instances in which politics, you have different goals and whatever. But a lot of what we're talking about is people wanting the same things, just having
to be cared for.
Sometimes just wildly different ideas and sometimes no ideas about how to get there.
Yeah. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to sit down with them and be like, what is your solution to every crisis that is happening in America right now? I'm like, we'd be making a lot more money, girl, if we knew the answers to that. We wouldn't be sitting right here. Exactly. That's for sure. So I wasn't going to put anybody on the spot that way, but I was so relieved when someone would finally come along and demonstrate their willingness for optimism, which I don't like toxic positivity. I don't like blind optimism, but it was after hearing the kind of relentless things are terrible and these people are terrible and I believe in the craziest things and I'm going to say it with my chest, which I respect to some degree. It was so nice to hear somebody kind of exhaling with me and being like, we got to keep working towards it. I'm impatient and it shouldn't be crazy to say that, but we got to keep working towards it. And I was like, soul sister.
And honestly, ultimately, I think that's a great encapsulation of what we're going to see in this election, which is both are going to be saying something is really wrong, but ultimately, I think what's going to decide it is whether or not people go for a clear plan to get out or not. You know, actually, I don't want to end on that. I don't like that. You ended.
I was going to say, I mean, this election is going to show us a lot about whether people want to pursue feeling better or people want to pursue feeling worse as a means to get better. It's like zero-sum gain. Like I can't do better unless other people are doing worse versus we can all collectively be better together. I think collectivism versus individuality are going to be a main conversation point for not only us talking about this, but for America as a whole.
And which candidate they ultimately believe is going to deliver that.
100%, even if it wasn't the choices that they originally wanted, which we're here anyway. So this was an adventure, an escapade, as one would say, out into the world. Maybe I'll do it again. You guys can let me know if you like this and want to see more. Make sure you like and subscribe What the Fuck America right here on YouTube. We'll see you next time.